Get out of my examination room. Dr. Crane's hand came down so hard on the examination tray that the instruments crashed to the floor. He grabbed Tessa's notes, the ones she had spent 3 sleepless nights preparing, and he tore them. Not once, not twice. He tore them into pieces right in front of her face and let them fall. Then he stepped close enough that she could see the vein pulsing at his temple, and he said very quietly, "You go near that girl again, I will end your career before it even starts. Are we clear?" 18 years, a blind girl, a doctor who already knew the truth and buried it anyway. If you believe every patient deserves a fighter, subscribe right now, hit that bell, and tell me what city you're watching from. The morning Tessa Morgan walked into Ward 7 of Northridge Military Medical Center for the very first time, she made exactly the kind of impression you would expect from a 26-year-old nurse on her 3rd week at a new hospital, which is to say, almost none at all. She was quiet. She was efficient. She kept her dark hair pulled back tight, wore her scrubs pressed clean, and moved through the corridors with a kind of careful, deliberate energy that told you she was paying close attention to everything around her while trying very hard not to seem like she was. The other nurses noticed her in the way you notice a piece of furniture that's been moved 2 inches to the left. Something's different, you think, then you move on. That was fine with Tessa. She hadn't come to Northridge to make friends or impress anyone. She had come because it was the only posting that had opened up after 18 months of applying, because the pay was slightly better than what she'd been making at the county clinic in Barstow, and because her mother had told her, the week before she died, that Tessa had a gift she was wasting in a place where nobody needed to be saved. Tessa wasn't sure she believed that, but she had taken the posting anyway. Ward 7 was the long-term care unit, the patients who had been there so long that the hospital had essentially built itself around them. They had their routines, their preferences, their complicated relationships with the staff. They knew which orderly would bring an extra pudding if you complained about the food, which doctor did his rounds 3 minutes early on Thursdays, and which nurses you could call for anything in the night without feeling like you were burdening someone. Tessa learned all of this in her first week. She learned it by listening. It was on her 4th day in Ward 7 that she first heard the name Avery Blackwood. She heard it the way you hear anything important in a hospital, sideways, through half-open doors, in the spaces between other conversations. "Blackwood's daughter is on the schedule for her quarterly check this Friday," said one of the senior nurses, a heavy-set woman named Carol, who had been at Northridge for 22 years and had the particular confidence of someone who had outlasted 4 department heads and 2 hospital administrators. "Someone needs to prep room 12. "I'll do it," said the other nurse, a younger woman named Dana, who said everything like it was slightly less interesting than she'd hoped. "Is Dr. Crane doing the exam himself?" "When does Dr. Crane not do the exam himself?" Carol said, and there was something in her voice, not quite bitterness, not quite resignation, something in between that Tessa filed away without quite knowing why. "What's wrong with her?" Tessa asked. Both women turned to look at her. Carol in particular looked at her the way veterans look at new recruits who have just asked a question that reveals exactly how new they are. "Avery Blackwood," Carol said slowly, as if she were explaining it to someone very young, "has been a patient at this hospital since she was 4 months old. Her father is General Marcus Blackwood. Do you know who General Blackwood is?" "I know the name," Tessa said, which was true. Everyone in the military medical system knew the name. General Marcus Blackwood was the kind of man whose name appeared on buildings, on endowments, on plaques beside doors that most people were never allowed to enter. "Avery was born blind," Carol continued. "Bilateral optic condition. That's what the file says. She's had 17 specialists over 18 years. Dr. Crane has been her primary ophthalmologist for the last 9 of those years. The girl cannot see. She never has. That is the end of the story." Tessa looked at her. "And who does her routine exams? Between the specialist visits?" Carol and Dana exchanged a look that Tessa couldn't entirely read. "Whoever's assigned," Dana said. And who's assigned this Friday? There was a pause. You are, Carol said finally, since you volunteered for room 12 prep. Tessa nodded. All right. She went back to work. She didn't say anything else. But that word Carol had used, the end of the story, sat in her chest like a splinter. She had learned early in her career that when someone told you something was the end of the story, it usually meant they had stopped asking questions. It didn't mean the story was actually over. Avery Blackwood was 18 years old. Tessa had read the file twice by Thursday night and a third time on Friday morning before her shift. Not because she expected to find anything, Carol had made it very clear that this case had been reviewed by people whose credentials made Tessa's look like a crayon drawing. But because she had been trained, in a way that was more instinct than education at this point, to read patient files the way other people read mystery novels, looking not just at what was written, but at what wasn't. The file was immaculate. 17 consultations. Every major eye hospital in the country represented. Diagnoses ranging from congenital optic nerve hypoplasia to Leber congenital amaurosis to bilateral retinal dysplasia. The terminology changed slightly with each specialist, but the conclusion never did. Permanent, irreversible, no treatment indicated. What Tessa noticed, turning the pages slowly in the break room at 6:15 in the morning, was how similar the language was. Not similar in the way that medical language is always similar. Similar in the way that someone had been very careful to make sure it was similar. Like the same note played over and over in a different key. She put the file down, picked up her coffee, looked at the wall. She was probably wrong. She almost certainly was. She was a 26-year-old nurse with 3 weeks at this hospital and not a single ophthalmology credential to her name. The idea that she was going to find something 17 specialists had missed was not humility. It was statistical impossibility. She picked the file back up and kept reading. Avery Blackwood arrived at room 12 at 9 o'clock on Friday morning, walking with the particular confidence of someone who has been blind her entire life and has therefore never had the experience of forgetting that she can't see. She moved with a long, white cane, swept the doorway, found the examination chair without being guided, and sat down. She was tall. She had her father's jaw, strong, straight, the kind that looked like it had never considered compromise. Her eyes were open, and they were the color of amber in winter light, clear, unusual, completely still. There was no involuntary movement in them, no nystagmus, which Tessa noted. There was also no opacification that she could see from across the room, which she also noted. "You're not Carol," Avery said before Tessa had spoken. "No," Tessa said. "I'm Tessa Morgan. I'm a nurse here. I'll be doing your routine check today before Dr. Crane's quarterly next week." Avery was quiet for a moment. "Carol does my routine checks. Carol's on a different rotation this month. I'm sorry if that's..." "I'm not upset," Avery said, and her voice was flat in the way of someone who has spent a very long time managing other people's discomfort about her condition. "I just like to know who I'm talking to. What hospital did you train at?" "Cedars-Sinai for my clinical. Barstow County before here." Barstow. Something almost like amusement crossed her face. "That's the middle of the desert." "Pretty much, yes." "Why'd you leave?" Tessa paused, not because the question surprised her, but because the answer was complicated in a way she wasn't sure she wanted to share with a patient she just met. "My mother passed," she said finally. "I needed a change." Avery didn't say she was sorry. What she said was, "Did you love it there, Barstow?" "Parts of it," Tessa said. Avery nodded slowly. It was a very adult nod, the kind that meant, "I understand the parts you're not saying." Tessa began the routine. She went through the standard protocol: pressure check, external examination, reflexes. She worked carefully and she worked quietly. And Avery sat with the particular stillness of someone who had been examined so many times that the experience had become purely neutral, like sitting in a waiting room. Then Tessa reached for the ophthalmoscope. She wasn't going to find anything. She knew she wasn't going to find anything. She had told herself that clearly, and she believed it. She was doing a routine check on a patient whose file was thicker than most people's arms, and she was going to see exactly what 17 other people had seen, and she was going to document it, and she was going to move on with her day. She looked through the lens. She adjusted the focus. She looked again. And then she was completely still for 4 seconds that felt considerably longer than that. There was a membrane. It was thin, gossamer fine, barely visible at this magnification. A translucent layer sitting across the central visual field of the right eye, and she could see, even without the more advanced equipment, that it had a particular texture, a particular sheen that she recognized from a paper she had read 18 months ago while doing post-certification research on a different condition entirely. A paper about a rare presentation of posterior vitreous membrane formation. Treatable, the paper had said, with the right surgical approach and the right surgical timing, in patients whose optic structures were otherwise intact. She pulled back from the lens. She felt her heart doing something irregular. She looked at Avery's file. She looked at the ophthalmoscope. She looked back at Avery. "Miss Blackwood," she said, and her voice came out remarkably steady, given that every nerve in her body was currently arguing with every other nerve. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be as specific as you can. Have you ever, in any light, any conditions, had any perception of light at all? Even brief, even just a sense of brightness?" Avery was very still. "Why are you asking me that?" she said. "Please, just answer honestly." Avery's jaw was tight. "The specialists asked me that when I was little. Every single one of them. I told them no because that's what I believed. That's what they told me was the answer." And now? A long silence. Something moved across Avery's face, something complex and old and a little raw. "Sometimes," she said very quietly, "when I'm in direct sunlight, I don't see anything, but there's something, a difference, like a warmth that's also a brightness, if that makes any sense. I always thought it was just temperature, heat, not light." Tessa set the ophthalmoscope down very carefully on the tray beside her. "I need to make some notes," she said, still in that same steady voice. "And I'm going to need to request a more detailed scan for your quarterly appointment." "What did you find?" Tessa looked at her. Looked directly at her still amber eyes, which were pointed not quite at her face, but close enough. And she made the decision that would determine the next 2 years of her life in approximately 3 seconds. "I'm not sure yet," she said. "I don't want to say something until I'm more certain, but I'm going to make sure someone looks more carefully." She did not say, "I think you might be able to see." She thought it. She wrote it in her personal notes that evening, sitting in her car in the parking structure at 7:15, hands shaking slightly, handwriting worse than usual. "I think she might be able to see. I think someone missed something. I think the membrane in her right eye is not a product of the underlying condition. I think it may be secondary. I think it is treatable." She put the pen down, looked at the steering wheel, then she wrote, "I need to talk to Dr. Crane." She should have known better. She knew that, afterward. She should have gone to the department head or the patient advocate or literally anyone other than the man whose signature appeared on the most recent 3-year summary of Avery Blackwood's case. But Tessa had not yet learned, had not yet been forced to learn, that there is a particular kind of institutional arrogance that does not respond to evidence. That in certain men, their ego and their expertise have become so completely fused together that any challenge to one feels to them like an attack on the other. She had not yet learned that about Dr. Crane. She learned it the following Monday morning. She had prepared. She had spent the entire weekend doing exactly that, going back through the research, finding the specific paper on posterior vitreous membrane formations, printing photographs, annotating her own notes from the examination with the terminology she needed, rehearsing the conversation in her bathroom mirror until the bags under her eyes were significant enough that her neighbor knocked on the door to ask if she was all right. Dr. Crane's office was on the third floor of the East Wing, which was the newest and most expensively renovated part of the hospital, and which smelled like carpet fresh from the factory and the particular kind of careful climate control that exists specifically to preserve the comfort of people who make the decisions. His name was on the door in letters that were slightly too large. Tessa knocked. "Come in." He was behind his desk. He was 63 years old, silver-haired, with the erect posture of someone who had played tennis for 40 years and wanted you to know it. He was reading something when she entered, and he finished reading it before he looked up, which she recognized as a power move so basic it was almost endearing. "Nurse Morgan, is it? Sit down." She sat. "I understand you performed a routine check on the Blackwood girl last Friday." "I did," she said. "That's what I'm here about." "Go ahead." She laid the notes in front of him, the photographs from the research paper, her annotations. She had organized it carefully, with the precision of someone who had learned that you only ever get one chance to be taken seriously, and you had better use it cleanly. She spoke for 6 minutes. She laid out everything she had seen, everything she had read, the specific characteristics of the membrane, the literature on treatable posterior vitreous formations, the significance of Avery's partial light perception, the case for a more detailed examination using equipment that hadn't been applied to Avery's right eye in the last 3 years of documentation. Dr. Crane listened. He sat with his hands folded on the desk, and he listened to all of it. When she finished, there was a silence. Then he unfolded his hands and picked up her notes and looked at them the way a person looks at a child's drawing when they are trying to find something kind to say. "Nurse Morgan," he said, "how long have you been at this hospital?" 3 weeks. "And before that, Barstow County Clinic?" "Yes." "How many ophthalmology cases did you handle at Barstow County Clinic?" She knew where this was going. "My experience is in general medicine, but the literature I've cited—" "The literature you've cited," he said, setting the papers down, "refers to a condition that presents in a very specific way, under very specific circumstances, and which I can assure you I am familiar with. I have been treating Avery Blackwood for 9 years. I am aware of her complete diagnostic history, which includes examinations from 2 of the most respected ophthalmology departments in this country." He paused. "I appreciate that you perform the routine check conscientiously, but what you've described in your notes is not what you think it is. The structure you observed is consistent with her existing condition. It is not a secondary membrane. It is not treatable. And it is not something that has been missed by anyone." Tessa looked at him. "Could I ask," she said carefully, "when her right eye was last examined with a high-resolution OCT scan?" "That information is in the file. The most recent one in the file is from 3 years ago." "That's correct. In 3 years, the presentation of this kind of formation can change significantly. The research indicates—" "I know what the research indicates." And now there it was, the first real edge in his voice. Still controlled, still cordial enough, but with a sharpness underneath like a wire under a layer of felt. "I am not going to order an additional OCT scan on a patient whose diagnosis is well established, based on a routine check conducted by a nurse with 3 weeks of experience at this facility. This is not a reflection on your competence in your role. It is a recognition of the limits of that role. Am I being clear?" She held his gaze for exactly as long as she could without it becoming a confrontation, and then she nodded once. "Yes," she said, "you are." She picked up her papers. She stood. She walked to the door. "Nurse Morgan." She stopped, turned. "The Blackwood family," Dr. Crane said, in a tone that had shifted into something that was almost gentle, almost paternal, and was neither, "has been through a great deal of difficulty over many years. General Blackwood is a man who needs stability where his daughter's care is concerned. I would ask you to consider very carefully whether raising unfounded concerns serves that family's interest, or whether it simply adds to the burden they have already been carrying for 18 years. Tessa stood in the doorway. "I'll consider that," she said. "Thank you for your time." She walked down the hallway. She walked past the elevator because she needed the stairs, needed the act of moving down the 3 flights with her feet hitting each step solidly, needing the physical reality of that to keep her voice from shaking in a way she didn't want anyone to see. She pushed through the door into the stairwell, and she stood there on the landing for a moment, with her eyes closed and her hand flat against the cold concrete wall. She thought about what he had said. She thought about Avery Blackwood saying sometimes, "When I'm in direct sunlight, there's a difference, a warmth that's also a brightness." She thought about 18 years. She opened her eyes. She was not going to stop. She knew that clearly, in the way you know the things that are true about yourself that are not entirely comfortable. She knew it the same way she had known, sitting across from the department head in Barstow who told her to let the Harrigan case go, that she was not going to let the Harrigan case go. She had a gift, her mother had said. Tessa thought the more accurate word was a problem, but they sometimes looked the same. The question was what to do now. She could go to the department head. She ran through that calculation quickly. Dr. Crane was the department head's closest professional ally. She had 3 weeks of tenure at this hospital. She had a page of handwritten notes and a printed research paper. She would last approximately 8 minutes in that conversation. She could go to the patient advocate. She ran through that one too. The patient advocate could request a review, but reviews took time, and in the meantime, Dr. Crane would be informed. And she had no doubt about what would happen to her position here in the interval. She could go directly to General Blackwood. She stood on the landing for another 30 seconds. Going directly to General Marcus Blackwood, over the head of the attending physician, over the head of every protocol this hospital had ever written, was the kind of thing that did not happen in a career without consequences. She understood that completely. There was a version of this where she made that move and she was right, and it changed everything. And there was a version, a considerably more likely version by most calculations, where she made that move, she was wrong, and she spent the rest of her professional life explaining why she had gone around an established specialist to raise unfounded concerns with one of the most powerful military figures in the country. She started down the stairs. She was going to find out what version she was in. She would go through proper channels first. One more attempt. She would go to the chief medical officer's administrative desk, and she would request a formal second opinion review on the basis of new observational data. She would submit it in writing. She would use the correct form. She would do everything exactly by the book, and she would wait, and she would see what happened next. What happened next, as it turned out, was a phone call. She was in the break room at 12:45 when her work extension rang. She picked it up. "Nurse Morgan," it was Carol's voice. Carol, who had been at this hospital for 22 years and who knew where every body was buried and what every piece of paperwork actually meant. "I need you to listen to me carefully." "I'm listening." "Dr. Crane has flagged your personnel file." Tessa set down her coffee cup. "He's initiated a performance review," Carol said, "on the basis of inappropriate conduct in a patient consultation, specifically raising unverified medical claims with a long-term patient outside the scope of nursing duties." A pause. "You talked to the Blackwood girl. During the exam, you asked her questions you weren't authorized to ask." "I asked her about her perception of light," Tessa said, "as part of the examination." "Tessa," Carol's voice dropped half a register. "I'm telling you this because I'm telling you, not because I'm supposed to. Whatever you found or didn't find, it doesn't matter. This is how it ends. File a formal complaint, get out processed, and go home. That's the path he's laying out for you. Unless I drop it." A silence. Unless you drop it, Carol confirmed. Tessa looked at the coffee cup on the table in front of her. At the small dark ripple across the surface of it from her hand, still trembling slightly against the table edge. "Carol," she said, "have you ever looked at Avery Blackwood's file? Really looked at it?" "I've seen the file. Every specialist note reads like it was written from the same template. Did you ever wonder why?" The silence this time was longer. "I'm going to pretend," Carol said carefully, "that you didn't say that to me." "Okay," Tessa said, "and I'm going to suggest that you think very hard tonight about what you're doing." "I will," Tessa said. "I appreciate you calling." She hung up. She sat in the break room for another minute. Then she picked up her cell phone, her personal one, not the work extension, and she found the number she had looked up 2 days ago and saved under a contact name that said simply, "General's Office, Northridge Liaison." She stared at the number. Then she looked down at her notes one last time. "I think she might be able to see." She pressed call. The phone rang twice. "General Blackwood's office," said a crisp, professional voice on the other end. "How can I direct your call?" Tessa took a breath. "My name is Tessa Morgan," she said. "I'm a nurse in Ward 7 at Northridge Military Medical Center. I need to speak with General Blackwood about his daughter. I believe there's something in her case that has been missed, and I believe every day we wait makes it harder to fix." A pause on the line. "Please hold." Tessa held. Outside the break room window, she could see the parking structure and the tree line beyond it, and the winter sky sitting flat and gray above everything like a lid pressed down. She thought about her mother. She thought about what it means to have a gift you're wasting in a place where nobody needs to be saved. She thought about a girl with amber eyes sitting in direct sunlight, feeling something she had been told for 18 years was not what she thought it was. "Ma'am?" The voice came back. "Yes," Tessa said. "The general will take your call." The general picked up on the second ring. Not an aide, not a secretary routing through another line. General Marcus Blackwood himself, his voice carrying that particular quality of a man who had spent 40 years giving orders that determined whether people lived or died, and who had somehow, under all of that, never stopped being a father first. "Who is this?" he said. "My name is Tessa Morgan. I'm a nurse in Ward 7 at Northridge. I examined your daughter last Friday." A silence. Not the silence of surprise. The silence of a man choosing his next words the way a soldier chooses his footing in unknown terrain. "Nurse Morgan," he said, "I've had 17 people examine my daughter. Every single one of them has told me the same thing. Why should I believe you have something different to say?" Tessa had prepared for this. She had rehearsed it, but what came out of her mouth was not the rehearsed version. What came out was the truth, plain and undecorated, because she had spent 3 weeks learning that General Marcus Blackwood was not a man you handled. He was a man you talked to straight. "Because I think they were all looking at the same file," she said, "and I think the file was wrong from the beginning." Another silence, longer this time. "Where are you right now?" he said. "The break room on the second floor." "Stay there. I'll have someone call you within the hour." He hung up. Tessa put her phone down on the table. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, or not entirely from fear, but from the particular physical response of a body that has just done something it cannot take back, and has only now fully processed that fact. She had just called General Marcus Blackwood over the head of his daughter's attending physician, over the head of every protocol the hospital had written, 3 weeks into her tenure at a facility where she was still learning which elevator went to which floor. She thought about Dr. Crane's hands tearing her notes into pieces, the sound of them hitting the floor. She picked up her coffee. It was cold. She drank it anyway. 47 minutes later, her phone rang. "Nurse Morgan." The voice was different, younger, clipped, military efficient. "This is Captain Reeves, General Blackwood's adjutant. The general would like to meet with you tomorrow morning at 0800. Off-site. He'll send a car." A pause. "He also asked me to tell you, and these are his words exactly, that if you're wasting his time, he'll know within the first 3 minutes. And if you're not, he wants to hear everything. Tell him I'll be there, Tessa said, and tell him I'm not wasting his time. She sat in her car that night until almost 10 o'clock, going through everything one more time. The research, her notes, reconstructed from memory after Crane had destroyed them. The specific characteristics of what she'd seen through the ophthalmoscope. The paper on posterior vitreous membrane formations that she had now read 11 times and could recite from memory in the dark. She also thought about something she had not yet let herself think about directly, because it was the thing that scared her the most. Not because it was frightening in the obvious sense, but because of what it meant if she was right. If this membrane was secondary, if it was not a product of Avery's underlying condition, but something that had developed separately, something that had been either missed or misidentified, then someone had failed this girl for 18 years. Not failed in the way medicine sometimes fails, honestly, at the edge of what is knowable. Failed in the way that requires a decision, a choice to look at something and call it something else. She didn't want to believe that. She sat in her car and she genuinely, actively did not want to believe it. But the uniformity of the file notes sat in her mind like a stone in still water. 17 specialists, 17 variations of the same conclusion. No divergence. No second opinion that pushed back. No notation anywhere in 9 years of Dr. Crane's documentation suggesting that the diagnosis had been tested against new evidence. In medicine, that kind of uniformity was not natural. Doctors disagreed. That was how the field moved forward. When they didn't disagree, when a file read like one voice in 17 different handwritings, it was worth asking why. She started the car and drove home. She slept 4 hours. It was enough. The car came at 7:30. A black sedan, civilian plates, driver who did not introduce himself and did not make conversation, which Tessa respected. She sat in the back with her folder on her knees and watched the city move past the window and thought about nothing in particular, which was how she prepared for things that mattered. General Marcus Blackwood was waiting for her in a private room at a hotel 8 blocks from the hospital. Not a conference room, a sitting room. The kind hotels maintain for guests who need to hold meetings without the particular visibility of a lobby or a restaurant. He was standing when she came in, which surprised her. She had expected him to be behind a table. He was taller than his photographs, broader. He had Avery's jaw, or she had his. The same straight, uncompromising line of it. He was in civilian clothes, which somehow made him look more authoritative rather than less. The way certain people look more powerful when they are not in uniform because the authority is clearly theirs and not the clothes. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. She met his gaze and did not look away, because she had the sense that this was a man who decided things about people in the first 10 seconds of meeting them, and she needed him to decide correctly. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He sat across from her. No aide in the room, no recorder that she could see, just the two of them and the folder on her knees and 18 years of a girl's life hanging in the air between them. "Talk," he said. She talked. She went through all of it, the examination, what she'd seen, what the research said, the characteristics of the membrane, Avery's response when she'd asked about light perception. She laid the research paper on the table between them. She pointed to the specific passages. She did not editorialize. She did not try to make it more dramatic than it was. She presented it the way she would present it to a physician, because General Blackwood might be military, but he had spent 18 years becoming fluent in medical language out of necessity, and she respected that. When she finished, he was quiet. "You said the file notes were uniform," he said. "What exactly do you mean by that?" 17 specialist consultations, and not one of them pushed back on the diagnosis. Not one notation suggesting an alternative consideration. In my experience, and I know my experience is limited compared to, "I'm not interested in your modesty, Nurse Morgan. Tell me what you think." She met his eyes. I think someone decided on this diagnosis early, and I think every specialist who came after was reviewing that decision rather than the patient. I think the membrane I found may have been present for years and categorized as part of the primary condition. And I think if you get a high-resolution OCT scan of Avery's right eye with a fresh set of eyes reading it, you will find something that changes everything. He looked at the research paper for a long moment. Dr. Crane, he said, he's denied my findings and initiated a performance review against me. Something moved across Blackwood's face. It was not shock. It was something harder and older than shock. The expression of a man who has suspected something for a long time and has just been handed the first concrete edge of a confirmation. How long have you been a nurse? He asked. 6 years, 3 weeks at Northridge. And you found this in a routine check? Yes. Why didn't anyone else? That, Tessa said quietly, is the question I keep asking myself. And I think the answer is that no one was looking for it because the file told them not to. He stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there with his back to her for what felt like a very long time. When he turned around, his face had settled into something absolute. She had seen that expression on exactly 2 other people in her life. Her mother, the day she decided to stop treatment, and the chief of staff at Barstow, the day he finally admitted the hospital had been wrong about the Harrigan case. It was the expression of a decision that has been made and cannot be unmade. I want an independent ophthalmologist, he said, not affiliated with Northridge, not connected to anyone who has ever been connected to Avery's file. I want a scan done within the week, and I want Dr. Crane present when those results are read. He won't like that. I'm not asking him to like it. His voice dropped to something very quiet and very final. I've been told my daughter will never see for 18 years. I accepted it. I built our entire life around it. Every decision I made for that child was made inside that truth. He paused. If that truth was manufactured, then I have been living in a cage someone else built for me. And I am going to find out. Tessa drove back to the hospital in a different car. Her own, because the general's car had other places to be, and she realized, exactly 38 minutes before her shift started, and Dr. Crane discovered she had not, in fact, quietly dropped anything. She did not know, walking back into Ward 7 at 9:02, that she had 48 hours before everything broke open. She found out about the other cases by accident. It was Dana who mentioned it at the nursing station at 11:15, in the offhand way that Dana mentioned everything, without any apparent awareness of the weight of what she was saying. Did you hear they're doing a records audit in the East Wing? Dana said, not looking up from the chart she was filling out. 3rd time this year. Something about an insurance flag on long-term diagnoses. Tessa looked at her. What kind of flag? I don't know the details, billing stuff, something about diagnosis codes that were assigned too early and not reviewed. Dana shrugged. It's above my level. Tessa waited until her lunch break. Then she went to the medical records department on the 4th floor, where a quiet man named Arthur had been managing files for 11 years and had the particular patience of someone who had watched many people come and look for things they didn't entirely understand. She didn't ask for Avery's file. She asked for something more specific, a list of long-term ophthalmological cases with Dr. Crane as the attending, with diagnosis codes assigned within the first 2 years of the patient's file, that had not had a formal diagnostic review in more than 36 months. Arthur looked at her over his glasses. That's a very specific request. I know, she said. That kind of query usually comes from administration. I know that too. He looked at her for a moment. Then he turned back to his terminal. I'm going to run a general audit query for department review purposes, he said, in the tone of someone being extremely precise about what they were and were not doing. If the results happen to be on the printer when you walk past it in 4 minutes, I don't know anything about that. Tessa walked past the printer in 4 minutes. She took the pages to a bathroom stall and read them there, standing, because she did not trust her legs entirely by the time she reached the third page. 22 cases. 22 long-term ophthalmological patients with Dr. Crane as the attending, with early assigned diagnosis codes of permanent visual impairment, none of whom had received a formal diagnostic review using current imaging technology in the last 3 to 7 years. 22 people who had been told they would never see by the same doctor using the same language, documented in the same way. She stood in the bathroom stall with those pages in her hands, and she felt something she couldn't name precisely. Not anger, not yet, not shock, because she had been building toward this and some part of her had known. It was something older and heavier than any of those things. It was grief, she thought, the particular grief of a truth that arrives too large for the space you have available. 22 people. She folded the pages and put them in her pocket and walked back to her station, and did not say anything to anyone for the rest of the afternoon, because she needed to think clearly, and she could not do that if she was talking. By 3 o'clock, she had made 3 decisions. The first was that she was going to call General Blackwood again. The second was that she was going to contact the hospital's patient advocacy board directly, in writing, with every document she had, and she was going to do it through certified mail, so there was a record of exactly when it was received and by whom. The third was that she was going to walk back into Avery Blackwood's room that afternoon, and she was going to tell her the truth. Not the complete truth, not yet, not until she was certain, but enough. Enough so that Avery could make a choice, so that Avery could decide whether she wanted to fight for this herself. That last decision scared her more than the other two. She found Avery in her room at 4:15, sitting in the chair by the window the way she always did at this hour, face turned toward the glass, her hands quiet in her lap. Tessa knocked on the open door. "It's Tessa Morgan," she said. Avery turned. "I know," she said. "You walk differently than Carol. Lighter on your left." Tessa came in, sat down across from her. There was a moment of quiet. "Dr. Crane filed a complaint against me," Tessa said, "for asking you about the light." Avery's expression did not change, but something in her posture did. A very slight shift, like a building settling. "I heard." "How?" "My father called me this morning." A pause. "He also told me he met with you." Tessa waited. "He told me what you found," Avery said. Her voice was completely level, the kind of level that takes real effort to maintain. "He didn't tell me what it means. He said you'd explain it better." Tessa leaned forward. She put her elbows on her knees. She talked to Avery the way she had talked to the general, straight, plain, without softening it into something it wasn't. "I found a membrane in your right eye," she said. "A very fine one. Based on what I've read, it may be a separate formation from whatever the underlying condition is, which means it may be treatable. I can't be certain yet. We need a more detailed scan, but I think it's there, and I think it's been there for a while." Avery was very still. "How long is a while?" she said. "I don't know. Years? Possibly." The silence after that was the kind that fills a room completely, that has weight and texture. Avery's hands, which had been still in her lap, slowly closed into fists. Not with anger, with the concentrated effort of someone who is doing everything they can to hold a very complex set of emotions at the exact right distance. "If it's treatable," she said, and her voice was measured with painful care, "and it has been there for years, then what does that mean?" Tessa looked at her. "It means someone should have found it sooner." Avery's jaw tightened. "Dr. Crane, I don't want to say anything before." "Tessa." It was the first time Avery had used her name. Just her name, with nothing on either side of it. And in the way she said it, there was something that was not a question and not a statement, but a kind of absolute demand for honesty that Tessa recognized because she had it herself. "Do not protect me from this. I am 18 years old and I have been blind my entire life. Whatever this is, whatever it means, I have earned the right to hear it without it being wrapped in cotton. Tessa held her gaze, or held the direction of her gaze, which was not quite the same thing, but was the closest she had. Yes, she said. Dr. Crane. Another silence. Then Avery said very quietly, almost to herself, he told my father 3 years ago that there was nothing new to try, that the technology hadn't advanced enough to change my situation. He said it in this room. I was sitting in this chair. She paused. My father cried, in the hallway, after. He thought I couldn't hear him, but I could. Tessa did not say anything. There was nothing to say to that would not diminish it. I want the scan, Avery said. Her voice had changed. The measured quality was still there, but underneath it something had hardened into something else. I want it done, and I want to be in the room when the results are read. Your father is arranging it. I know. Avery turned her face back toward the window. Dr. Crane is going to fight this. He already is. Good, she said, and her voice, in that moment, sounded more like her father than Tessa had expected. Then he'll be looking at me when it happens, when they tell him he was wrong. I want to be there for that. I may not be able to see his face, but I want to hear it. Tessa left the room at 4:43. In the hallway, she stood for a moment with her back against the wall, breathing in the particular way she had learned over 6 years of nursing. Slow, from the bottom of the breath up, the way you do when something has moved you more than you're ready for, and you still have a job to do. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. It said, I know what you're doing. Stop now while you still can. She stared at the message for a long moment. Then she screenshotted it, forwarded it to General Blackwood's adjutant with a brief note, and put her phone back in her pocket. She went back to work. At 7 that evening, 3 things happened almost simultaneously. The first was that the independent ophthalmologist General Blackwood had contacted, a doctor, Eleanor Voss, senior attending at Johns Hopkins, who had no connection whatsoever to Northridge or to anyone in Avery's file, confirmed that she would be available to conduct the scan and review on Wednesday morning. 2 days. The second was that Arthur from medical records left a voicemail on Tessa's personal phone, saying very carefully that he had been asked by hospital administration to pull the audit query she had requested and to document who had requested it. He said it in the particular, careful language of someone who was covering himself while simultaneously making sure the other person understood exactly what was happening. The third was that Dr. Crane walked past the nursing station at 7:15 and stopped. He looked directly at Tessa. He did not say anything. He simply stood there for 4 seconds. 4 seconds that felt like standing on the edge of something very high, and then he walked on. Tessa watched him go. Carol appeared at her elbow approximately 30 seconds later. Whatever you're doing, Carol said very quietly, not looking at her, apparently deeply interested in the chart in her hands. You need to know that he has already spoken to the chief medical officer. He's filing for a formal disciplinary review. Full board. When? Friday. Wednesday was the scan. Friday was the review. Tessa calculated that in the space between those 2 days, one of 2 things was going to happen. Either Dr. Voss's scan would find what Tessa had found, and the board review would become something else entirely, or it wouldn't, and Tessa would be standing in front of a disciplinary panel with nothing but handwritten notes and a research paper and the word of an 18-year-old girl who still could not see. She thought about that very carefully. She thought about 22 files, 22 people. She thought about Avery sitting in the chair by the window, face turned toward the light she had been told for 18 years she could not see. Then she stopped thinking about it because there was nothing useful in the thinking, only in the doing, and she had a shift to finish and a Wednesday to get to, and she was not, under any circumstances, going to let Marcus Blackwood down, or Arthur from medical records, or Carol who had called her despite not being supposed to, or Avery who had said, I want to hear it when they tell him he was wrong. She was not going to let any of them down. That was the only calculation that mattered now. Tuesday did not go the way Tessa had planned, which was something she should have expected by now. She arrived at the hospital at 6:50 in the morning, 40 minutes before her shift, because she had not slept more than 2 hours, and lying in bed pretending had started to feel like a waste of the dark. The parking structure was mostly empty. The corridor lights in Ward 7 were still on their night setting. Lower, softer, the particular quiet of a hospital before the day shift comes in and reminds it that it is supposed to be a busy place. She was at the nursing station reviewing the overnight notes when Carol appeared beside her. Carol, who worked mornings, was not supposed to arrive until 7:30. The fact that she was here at 6:55 told Tessa something before a single word was spoken. "He pulled your access," Carol said. Tessa looked up. "What?" "Dr. Crane. He went to administration last night and had your access to the Blackwood file restricted. Effective immediately. You're not authorized to enter Avery's room, review her chart, or participate in any aspect of her care." Carol set a single sheet of paper on the desk, an internal memo stamped and signed. It came through at midnight. Tessa looked at the memo. She read it once, very carefully, the way she read everything she needed to remember precisely. "Can he do that?" she asked. "He did it," Carol said simply. Tessa set the paper down. She felt something move through her. Not anger, not yet. Something more electric than anger, something that lived closer to the surface. She pressed it back down with the practiced effort of a person who had learned that visible emotion in a hospital corridor is a weapon other people use against you. "He knows about Wednesday," she said. "He knows about Wednesday," Carol confirmed. "I don't know how, but he does." Tessa thought for exactly 3 seconds. Then she picked up her personal phone and texted General Blackwood's adjutant. "Crane has restricted my access to Avery's file and room. He knows about Wednesday. Please advise." The response came back in 4 minutes. "The general is aware. Do not attempt to contact Avery through hospital channels. She will call you directly." Tessa put the phone in her pocket. She looked at Carol. "Has anyone told Avery?" "Someone from administration went to her room at 8 last night to inform her that her nursing assignments were being adjusted." Carol's voice carried something flat and careful in it. The voice of a person carefully not saying what they actually think. Avery apparently asked whether this was related to Nurse Morgan's findings. The administrator said it was a routine staffing decision. A pause. Avery told the administrator, and I'm quoting directly here because a third party was present, to get out of her room. Something that was almost a smile crossed Tessa's face. It was brief. "Good," she said. At 7:42, her personal phone rang. She stepped into the stairwell. "He took you off my case," Avery said. No greeting. Straight into it, exactly like her father. "Yes, because of Wednesday. That's my read. He's scared." She said it not with satisfaction, but with the clinical certainty of someone stating a fact about the weather. A man who was confident in his diagnosis doesn't remove the nurse who questioned it. He just lets the scan prove him right. Tessa leaned against the wall. "Avery, are you all right?" A pause. "Define all right." Honest answer. Another pause, this one longer. I've been awake since 3 in the morning. I've been sitting in this chair going through 18 years of memories and trying to figure out which ones I would have had differently. If I could have seen. Her voice was steady, but the steadiness was constructed, brick by brick, in real time. "I keep thinking about my father's face. I've never seen it. I know what it feels like. He used to hold my hand when I was little and put my fingers on his face so I could..." She stopped, started again. "I keep thinking that if you're right, I could have known what he looked like years ago, and someone decided I wouldn't." Tessa did not say anything. There was nothing adequate to say. "Don't let him stop Wednesday," Avery said. "Whatever he does between now and then, don't let him stop it." "I won't." "Promise me." "I promise you," Tessa said. She meant it with every cell in her body. She also knew, hanging up the phone, that a promise like that required something to back it up, and that between now and Wednesday morning, she needed to make sure the walls around this scan were solid enough that Dr. Crane could not dismantle them. She called the general's adjutant again. She asked 3 questions. The first was whether Dr. Voss had been confirmed and her schedule protected. The second was whether the scan facility was outside Northridge's administrative jurisdiction. The third was whether the general had legal counsel involved. The answer to all 3 questions was yes. She breathed out. Then she went back to her shift because she was still a nurse and there were still other patients on this ward who needed her. And she had learned, early, that the way you survive the long fights is by not letting them consume the ordinary moments that keep you functional. She managed 4 hours of ordinary before the next thing happened. It was Dana who told her at 11:30 with the same breezy obliviousness she brought to everything. "Did you hear there's a reporter in the building? Someone from the military press office, asking about long-term care cases. Administration is losing its mind." Tessa stopped walking. "A reporter?" "Yeah, one of those investigative types. Crew cut, notepad, the whole thing. He was in the lobby for about 20 minutes before security asked him to wait outside." Dana shrugged. "Something about a tip they got on a story. Nobody knows who called them." Tessa thought about the 22 files she had found. She thought about Arthur from medical records, who had been asked to document who had made the audit request. She thought about the anonymous text she had received. "Stop now while you still can." Someone else had already been pulling on this thread. Someone who had gotten there before her and then gone quiet, or been silenced, or been waiting for something to change. She did not say any of this to Dana. "Weird," she said, and kept walking. At 12:15, she found Arthur from medical records eating a sandwich alone in the 4th-floor corridor, the way he did every Tuesday, a habit so consistent that she had clocked it in her first week without trying to. She sat down next to him without being invited. "The reporter in the lobby," she said quietly. "Did you call them?" Arthur chewed, swallowed, looked at the wall in front of him. "I've worked at this hospital for 11 years, he said. "I have processed more files than I can count. In 11 years, I have seen one other instance of diagnostic uniformity the way it appears in those 22 cases." He paused. "I reported it internally 8 months ago, through the correct channels, in writing." Another pause. Nothing happened. The report was logged, reviewed by Dr. Crane's department, and closed without action. Tessa looked at him. "You called the reporter?" "I have no idea what you're talking about," Arthur said, and took another bite of his sandwich. She left him there and walked back down the stairs, and sat in the break room for 3 minutes with her hands flat on the table, thinking. 8 months ago, Arthur had flagged this. 8 months ago, someone had reviewed his flag and closed it, and the person whose department reviewed it was Dr. Crane, which meant Dr. Crane had known for at least 8 months that someone inside the hospital had identified the pattern, and he had responded by doing nothing, or, more accurately, by making sure nothing was done, which was not the same thing. She pulled out her folder. She added Arthur's information to her notes. Not by name, she was not going to drag him further into this than he had already stepped, but the fact of the internal report, the date, the outcome. She added it to the package she was building. Then she called the general's personal line. Not the adjutant, the general himself. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "There's a reporter at the hospital," she said, "and there's an internal report from 8 months ago that was flagged and buried. This is bigger than Avery's case. I think you already suspected that." A beat of silence. "I've had my own people looking," he said. "Since this morning. What do you have?" She told him about the 22 files. She told him about Arthur's report. She told him about the audit flag that had been pulled by administration after she requested it. The silence on his end this time was different from the others. It was the silence of a man who is recalibrating, who has just received the last piece of information that completes a picture he has been looking at for a very long time. "I'm calling my legal team," he said, "and I'm calling the Inspector General's office. That will take this far beyond a hospital matter." "Yes," he said, "it will." A pause. "Are you ready for that, Nurse Morgan?" She thought about Dr. Crane's face as he'd watched her in the hallway last night. 4 seconds of nothing that said everything. "I've been ready," she said. She was not entirely sure that was true, but she was sure enough. Wednesday arrived with the particular quiet intensity of days that have been dreaded and anticipated in equal measure. Days that the body recognizes before the mind catches up, that make you alert and strange from the moment you open your eyes. The scan facility was a private imaging center 6 miles from Northridge, affiliated with Johns Hopkins, and therefore completely outside the hospital's administrative reach. General Blackwood had made the arrangements with a kind of systematic thoroughness that suggested he had spent the last 48 hours doing very little except this. Dr. Eleanor Voss was 61 years old, small, precise, with the energy of someone who had chosen her specialty at age 12 and had never once reconsidered. She greeted Tessa in the reception area with a handshake that was brief and firm and communicated clearly that she had read everything Tessa had sent and was reserving judgment until she had seen the actual patient, which was exactly the right approach. Avery arrived with her father. Tessa had not seen General Blackwood since the hotel meeting. She had seen photographs of him, of course, everyone had, but there was something different about him in person and in motion that photographs did not capture. Something about the way he moved through a space like he had already assessed it and made peace with every possible outcome. He walked beside his daughter with his hand not at her elbow, the way people often made the mistake of guiding blind people, but half a step behind her, present without overriding, which told Tessa something about the kind of father he was. Avery found Tessa by sound before she'd crossed the room. "You kept your promise," she said. "I told you I would. A lot of people told me a lot of things." She said it without bitterness, just accuracy. Then, "Is she good, the doctor?" "She's very good," Tessa said. Avery nodded once, the way her father nodded. The family gesture, decisive and short. "Then let's go." Dr. Voss conducted the examination with the focused economy of someone who does not perform for audiences, which Tessa respected. She worked through the external assessment quickly, said nothing that indicated anything either way, and then moved to the OCT scanner, the high-resolution optical coherence tomography that could map the layers of the eye in cross-section with a precision that a standard ophthalmoscope could not approach. Tessa stood to the side. The general stood near the door. The room was very quiet except for the low hum of the equipment. The scan took 11 minutes. Dr. Voss reviewed the images on the monitor. She enlarged one section, enlarged it again. She was very still in the way that doctors are still when they are looking at something that has the potential to change what they thought they knew. Then she said, "Miss Blackwood, I need to ask you something." "Go ahead," Avery said. "When you're in direct sunlight, or any very bright light source, do you perceive anything at all? Any sensation that might be interpreted as light rather than heat?" And Avery, who had been asked this question 17 times over 18 years and had always said no because the file said no, said, "Yes, I always thought it was just warmth, but yes." Dr. Voss looked at the scan for another moment. Then she looked at Tessa. And what was on her face was not the polite neutrality she had worn for the past hour. What was on her face was something that had broken through the professional surface, something that was close to astonishment, and underneath that, something that looked almost like anger. "General Blackwood," she said, "I'd like you to come look at this." He crossed the room. He stood beside her and looked at the monitor. "This," Dr. Voss said, pointing to the image on the screen, "is a posterior vitreous membrane. It is a secondary formation. It is not part of Avery's primary condition. It is sitting across the central visual field of her right eye, and it is responsible for blocking the light signal from reaching the optic pathway. She paused. It is operable. With the right surgical approach, it can be removed. And based on what I'm seeing of the underlying structure, which is more intact than any of the previous documentation suggested, the probability of functional vision following removal is significant. Another pause. This is not a new formation. Based on its characteristics and density, I would estimate this has been present for a minimum of 7 to 10 years. The room was so quiet, Tessa could hear the ventilation system. General Blackwood said nothing. He looked at the image on the screen for a long time. When he finally turned away, his face was the face of a man who has just had the architecture of the last decade of his life revised in 11 minutes, and who is managing that with the kind of controlled devastation that costs everything to maintain. Avery said, very quietly from the examination chair, 7 to 10 years. At minimum, Dr. Voss said, possibly longer. And it could have been treated. Yes, the silence after that was different from all the other silences that day. It had mass. It had temperature. I want it in writing, the general said. His voice was completely level. The voice of 40 years of military command holding a man together by sheer practice force. Everything you found, I want a complete written assessment, signed, today. You'll have it within the hour, Dr. Voss said. Tessa was watching Avery. She was watching the way Avery sat in the chair, very still, her hands in her lap, her face turned slightly upward the way it always was when she was processing something. She watched the moment, the exact, specific moment, when the full weight of what she had just heard settled through Avery completely. Avery's eyes filled with tears. She did not wipe them. She let them fall, and there was something in the way she let them fall that was not grief and not joy, but both of those things and something beyond them. The particular emotion that has no clean name, that belongs to the moment when something you were told could never change, begins to change. The general crossed the room to his daughter and crouched down in front of her chair so he was at her level. He took both her hands in his. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Tessa looked away. Some moments are not meant to be witnessed directly. Dr. Voss touched her elbow gently and guided her into the corridor. Your nurse's notes, Dr. Voss said quietly, once the door had closed. They were precise. The membrane identification from a standard ophthalmoscope at that magnification. That was not a lucky guess. That was a very careful observation by someone who was paying attention when other people were not. Other people with more experience and better equipment, Tessa said. Equipment doesn't observe, Dr. Voss said. People observe, equipment confirms. She looked at her steadily. What are you going to do now? The general is contacting the Inspector General's office. There are 22 other cases. Something shifted in Dr. Voss's expression. How many? 22 long-term patients. Same diagnostic pattern, same attending. Dr. Voss was quiet for a moment. I'd like to offer my services to the review, if that's useful. It will be, Tessa said. It will be very useful. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She looked at it. It was a text from Carol's personal number, not the work extension. Short, 11 words. Crane just walked into the chief medical officer's office. He's been there 20 minutes. Tessa showed it to the general's adjutant, who had been waiting in the reception area, and who immediately made a phone call in a language that was technically English, but was structured like military code. Efficient, fast, no wasted syllables. The general's legal team is already at the hospital, the adjutant told her when he hung up, and the IG's office has been briefed. They're sending a representative this afternoon. Tessa absorbed this. This is moving fast. General Blackwood moves fast when he decides to move, the adjutant said. It was not said with pride or boastfulness. It was just a fact, delivered the way you deliver facts about weather or physics. She went back inside. The general was standing now, Avery beside him, her hand through his arm. Avery's face was still wet, but her expression had clarified. The complex emotion had resolved itself into something harder and more directed, something with edges. "Dr. Voss," Avery said, "the surgery, when could it happen? That depends on factors we'd need to assess, but I don't see a reason it couldn't be scheduled within the month if you wanted to move forward." "I want to move forward," Avery said. "There are risks. The vision recovery is not guaranteed to be—" "I know there are risks." She said it with the patience of someone who has spent 18 years being told what she can and cannot do, and is no longer willing to let that fact be used to slow her down. "I've been managing risk my entire life without being able to see what's coming. I'll manage this one too." Dr. Voss looked at her for a moment with something that might have been respect or recognition or both. "We'll talk through everything in detail, but yes, we can move forward." On the drive back to the hospital, the general insisted on dropping Tessa, said it directly and in a tone that didn't accommodate argument. Marcus Blackwood sat in the back beside her and said nothing for 4 of the 6 miles. Then he said, "Dr. Crane is going to say the scan results are being misinterpreted. He's going to say the membrane is consistent with the original diagnosis." "Probably," Tessa said. "He's going to come at you hard." "He already has." The general looked at her. Not the assessing look of their first meeting. Something different. Something that had moved past evaluation into something more direct. "I spent 18 years believing my daughter was unreachable in that one particular way," he said. "Every decision I made for her, every school, every adaptation, every plan, I made it inside that belief, because a man I trusted told me it was the truth." He paused. "You have been at this hospital for 3 weeks. You looked at my daughter for 45 minutes, and you saw what 9 years of specialists did not." Another pause. "I want you to understand that I will not let that go unanswered." Tessa looked at him. She thought about what to say to that. She thought about whether anything needed to be said. "Just make sure those other 22 people get what Avery's getting," she said finally. "That's all I want from this." He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he nodded once. The definitive Blackwood nod. "Done," he said. They pulled into the hospital parking structure at 2:17 in the afternoon. At 2:23, Tessa's work phone rang. It was the hospital administrator's office. The voice on the other end was a woman named Patricia Hollins, whose voice Tessa had heard once before on an all-staff announcement, and who carried, even through a phone, the particular energy of someone who is holding an extremely complex situation together through sheer administrative will. "Nurse Morgan," she said, "I need you in my office at 3 o'clock. Dr. Crane will also be present. This is in regard to the disciplinary review that was filed on Monday." "I'll be there," Tessa said. She hung up. She stood in the parking structure for a moment. Then she called General Blackwood's adjutant and said, "Tell him 3 o'clock. Administrator's office. Crane will be in the room." "I'll let him know," the adjutant said. What she did not know yet, what she had no way of knowing, was that at 2:18, while the general's car had still been pulling into the structure, Dr. Crane had walked out of the chief medical officer's office with a document in his hand. A document that Arthur would later describe to her as a preemptive internal review report. A report that had been prepared, apparently, over the previous 48 hours, that recharacterized the 22 cases identified in the audit as consistent with established diagnostic protocols and within the acceptable range of long-term care management. A report that was dated 3 days ago. A report that, if accepted by the board, would effectively erase the question before it could be properly asked. She didn't know about that document yet. She found out at 2:59, 60 seconds before she walked through the door of the administrator's office, when Carol sent her a photograph of it from a hallway printer, with one line of text beneath it. "He's been building this for a week. He knew you were coming before you called the general." Tessa stood outside the administrator's door. She looked at the photograph on her phone. She read the document. She read it once fast and once slow, and then she put her phone in her pocket. She breathed in, from the bottom of the breath up. Then she opened the door and walked in. Dr. Crane was already seated. He looked at her when she came through the door with the expression of a man who believes he is holding the only cards in the room. Tessa sat down across from him. She did not look away. She did not look down. She looked at him directly with the calm of someone who has already decided that whatever comes through this door is something she is prepared to walk through. The administrator, Patricia Hollins, cleared her throat. "Shall we begin?" "Yes," said Dr. Crane with a small, controlled smile. "Yes," said Tessa Morgan without one. Patricia Hollins had the kind of face that gave away nothing, which was either a professional skill or a survival mechanism developed over years of sitting between people who wanted to destroy each other inside conference rooms. She sat at the head of the table with a legal pad in front of her and a pen she hadn't yet uncapped, and she looked at both of them with the practiced neutrality of someone who had already decided that whoever lost this meeting was not going to be able to say they hadn't been given a fair process. Dr. Crane had brought a folder, a thick one. He set it on the table with the particular deliberateness of a man placing a weapon where everyone can see it. Tessa had brought nothing. Her hands were flat on the table in front of her. "This meeting," Hollins began, "has been called in response to a formal disciplinary complaint filed by Dr. Richard Crane regarding the conduct of nurse Tessa Morgan during the care of a long-term patient. I want to be clear that this is a preliminary hearing. No determinations are being made today. Both parties will be heard." She looked at Crane. "Dr. Crane, you filed the complaint. Please proceed." Crane opened the folder. He did not look at Tessa. He spoke directly to Hollins in the measured, authoritative tone of a man who had given testimony before hospital boards so many times that it had become automatic, smooth, credentialed, almost beautiful in its construction. "On Friday of last week, Nurse Morgan conducted a routine examination on a patient who has been under my care for 9 years. During that examination, she asked the patient questions that fell outside the scope of her nursing role, specifically regarding diagnostic conclusions that had been established and confirmed by multiple specialists. She then approached me directly with claims regarding the patient's diagnosis that demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of the underlying condition." He turned a page. "She subsequently made unauthorized contact with the patient's family, specifically with the patient's father, conveying unverified medical concerns in a manner that caused significant emotional distress to the family. She has further requested medical records outside her authorization and, I have reason to believe, has been speaking with members of the media regarding confidential patient matters." He closed the folder. He looked at Hollins. "What Nurse Morgan has done is not the behavior of a concerned clinician. It is the behavior of someone who does not understand the boundaries of her role and who has allowed personal ambition to override professional judgment. In a medical environment, that is not a minor infraction. It is a danger to patients." The room was quiet. Tessa did not move. She did not change her expression. She let the silence sit for exactly 3 seconds, because she had learned that how you enter a silence tells people as much as what you say. Then she said, "May I respond?" Hollins nodded. "Everything Dr. Crane has described is accurate in its facts and completely inaccurate in its interpretation," Tessa said. "I did ask the patient about her light perception. I did so because during the examination I observed something that warranted that question. I did contact Dr. Crane with my findings, and he responded by tearing my notes in half and initiating a performance review." She paused. "I then contacted the patient's father because Dr. Crane refused to order a follow-up scan because he restricted my access to the patient's file after I raised concerns, and because the document he placed before this committee 3 days ago, the preemptive review report characterizing 22 long-term cases as consistent with established protocols, was prepared before this meeting was ever called." She looked at Hollins directly. which means Dr. Crane was building a defense before he knew he needed one. And I'd like to know why. Crane's jaw tightened. It was small, almost imperceptible, but she caught it. Hollins looked between them. Nurse Morgan, what document are you referring to? The internal review report Dr. Crane submitted to the Chief Medical Officer's office this morning. The one dated 3 days ago. The one that was prepared, apparently, while I was still conducting examinations he hadn't yet been officially notified about. She held Hollins's gaze. I'd like that document entered into this discussion, and I'd like Dr. Crane to explain the timeline. Crane set his hand flat on the table. The report was prepared as part of a routine departmental review. The timing is coincidental. The timing, Tessa said, corresponds exactly to the day after I contacted General Blackwood. You have no way of knowing. I have a photograph of the document with its metadata intact, Tessa said. The creation date is in the file properties. Crane went very still. Hollins uncapped her pen. It was not the pen she had brought it out for originally. It was the pen of a woman who has just realized that this meeting has moved into territory she had not anticipated, and who is now writing something down for a different reason than she had planned. Dr. Crane, she said carefully, were you aware of Nurse Morgan's contact with General Blackwood before she filed the documentation referenced in your complaint? A pause that lasted slightly too long. I became aware of certain communications, he said. How? Another pause. Through administrative channels, he said. Tessa watched Hollins write that down. She watched the pen move, and she felt something shift in the room. Not dramatically, not like a break, but like the first give of ice under pressure. The small sound that comes before the crack. Her phone, on silent in her pocket, vibrated twice. She did not look at it. I'd like to request, Tessa said, keeping her voice completely level, that this hearing be paused pending the results of an independent medical review that took place this morning. A Dr. Eleanor Voss, senior attending at Johns Hopkins, conducted a high-resolution OCT scan of the patient in question. Those results have a direct bearing on every claim Dr. Crane has made in this room today. Hollins looked at her. When will those results be available? Dr. Voss indicated within the hour. It has now been, Tessa checked the clock on the wall, 83 minutes since we left the imaging center. Crane said, an independent scan conducted without my knowledge or authorization as the attending physician is inadmissible in any formal. The patient is 18 years old, Tessa said. She authorized the scan herself. Her father arranged it. You are her attending physician, not her guardian. The silence that followed had an entirely different quality from the ones before it. Hollins set her pen down. I'm going to request a brief recess, she said. 30 minutes. I'd like to make some phone calls. She stood. She left the room. Tessa and Dr. Crane were alone. This was the moment she had not planned for. Not specifically. She had planned for the meeting, for the document, for the timeline argument. She had not planned for the specific experience of sitting alone in a conference room with the man who had torn her notes in half and told her he would end her career. He looked at her across the table. You have no idea what you've done, he said. His voice was different now, not the boardroom tenor of a prepared presentation. Something raw, something that lived underneath the performance. I found something you missed, she said, or didn't miss. He leaned forward slightly. Listen to me very carefully. I have been practicing medicine for 31 years. I have treated over 4,000 patients. I have built a department that has the lowest malpractice rate in this region. Whatever you think you found, Dr. Voss found it too, Tessa said. A posterior vitreous membrane, secondary formation, present for a minimum of 7 to 10 years, operable with significant probability of functional vision recovery. She met his eyes. What I want to understand is whether you missed it or whether you knew it was there. The silence was total. His face did something complicated, Several things in rapid succession, like a series of masks changing too fast to identify any single one. Then it went still, very still. The stillness of a man who has just heard the thing he has spent a long time trying to ensure nobody ever said aloud in a room where it could be recorded. "Be very careful," he said. "I am being very careful," she said. "That's why we're here." Her phone vibrated again. Then again. Then it rang on silent, vibrating continuously. She looked down at it under the table. It was General Blackwood's adjutant. She excused herself from the room. "Dr. Voss's report is ready," the adjutant said, the moment she picked up. "The general is sending it to the hospital administrator's email right now, and the IG's representative arrived at the hospital 17 minutes ago. They're with the chief medical officer." Tessa stood in the corridor outside the conference room. "Crane knows the IG is here?" "He will in approximately 4 minutes." She went back inside. Crane was on his phone. He looked up when she entered, and she could tell from the way the color had changed in his face. Not drained, shifted, reconfigured, that someone had already told him. 4 minutes had been an optimistic estimate. He put his phone down. He looked at her. "The Inspector General's office," he said. It was not a question. "The general takes 22 misdiagnosed patients seriously," she said. "Apparently so does the federal government." Something moved across his face that she had not seen there before. Not anger. She had seen his anger. Not contempt. She had seen that too. This was something older and more private. Something that, in another man, in another situation, she might have called fear. "Those 22 cases," he said, and his voice had lost its precision, had become something rougher at the edges, "are not what you think they are." "Then explain what they are." He looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time since she had met him, Tessa had the sense that she was seeing something real behind the credential and the posture and the 31 years. Something that had been there for a long time, in the dark, making decisions. He did not explain. He closed his folder. He looked at the door. Hollins came back in at 3:41. She sat down. She did not open her legal pad. She looked at Dr. Crane with the expression of someone who has just made 17 phone calls in 30 minutes and has arrived at a conclusion she had not expected and is managing that conclusion with absolute professional composure. "Dr. Crane," she said, "the Inspector General's office has requested your full patient files for the 22 cases identified in the records audit. That request comes with federal authority and takes precedence over internal processes." A pause. "Additionally, Dr. Voss's report has been received and reviewed. Her findings directly contradict the current diagnostic record for the patient in question." Another pause. "In light of these developments, I'm suspending the disciplinary complaint against Nurse Morgan pending a full review, and I'm placing your active caseload under temporary co-management effective immediately." Crane said nothing. "Dr. Crane," Hollins said, "do you understand?" "I understand," he said. His voice was completely flat, emptied of everything. "You are not being suspended at this time, but you are not to have any contact with the Blackwood patient, her file, or any member of the 22 cases flagged in the audit. The legal team will be in contact." She looked at Tessa. "Nurse Morgan, you are reinstated to full duties. Your access restrictions are lifted. I apologize for the circumstances that led to those restrictions being imposed." Tessa looked at her. "The 22 patients," she said, "will someone be reaching out to them?" "The General's legal team has already begun that process," Hollins said, "in coordination with the IG office." Tessa nodded. She stood. She left the room without looking at Crane again, because there was nothing left to say to him in that room, and because looking at him felt like it would take something from her she needed to keep. In the corridor, she stood against the wall for a moment. She felt it then, all of it, the things she had been holding at arm's length for 5 days, the exhaustion, the relief, and underneath both of those things, something that wasn't quite joy, because joy felt too simple for what this actually was. This was the feeling of having done the right thing and discovered that the right thing was real, that it was not just a principle you carry, but something solid that holds up under the weight you put on it. Her phone rang. It was Avery. "My father called me," Avery said. "Is it done?" "Not done," Tessa said. "Started. There's a difference." A pause. "Will you come to my room tonight? I need to talk to someone who isn't my father." "I'll be there at 6. She put her phone away. She went back to work. The next 4 hours were the strangest of her career, stranger even than the confrontations, the scan, the conference room, because everything on the surface looked like an ordinary shift. She checked charts, she administered medications, she answered call buttons. She made the quiet, precise rounds that constitute most of what nursing actually is, away from the drama that gets remembered and toward the labor that keeps people alive in the intervals. But underneath it, the hospital was a different organism. She could feel it, the way you feel weather changing before the instruments confirm it. People talking in lower registers in corners, administration staff moving with the particular speed of those managing something that has escalated beyond what they had prepared for. Carol giving her a look at the station that contained more communication than most people manage in a paragraph. At 4:20, Arthur from medical records appeared briefly in the hallway outside Ward 7. He did not come in. He stood in the corridor, and when Tessa came out, he fell into step beside her without announcement. "The IG team has requested the full audit files," he said, "including the internal report I submitted 8 months ago." "Good." They also pulled the access logs, who reviewed it, when, and what action was taken. He paused. "Or what wasn't taken." Tessa looked at him. "How are you doing?" He was quiet for a moment. "I reported something 8 months ago and nothing happened. For 8 months I've been sitting with that." Another pause. "It's not a comfortable feeling to know you were right." "No," she said, "it isn't." He turned at the corridor junction and went back the way he'd come. She watched him go and thought about the particular loneliness of being correct about something terrible before anyone is ready to believe you. She found General Blackwood outside Avery's room at 5:40. He was standing in the hallway, not pacing because she suspected Marcus Blackwood did not pace, but standing with the weight of a man who has been in motion for days and has arrived at the first moment where there is nothing urgent left to do, and discovered that stillness is harder. He looked at her when she turned the corner. "She keeps asking me to explain the surgery," he said. "I keep telling her I'm not a doctor. She keeps telling me to try anyway." "She's going to be a difficult patient," Tessa said. "She's been a difficult everything since she was 3 years old." He said it the way you say things about people you love completely. "She told me this morning that when she wakes up in the recovery room after the surgery, the first thing she wants to see is not my face." He paused. "I asked her why. She said, 'Because I know your face already. I can feel it every time I put my hands on it. I want to see something I've never known.'" Tessa said nothing. There was nothing to add to that. He looked at her directly. "The IG investigation is going to take time, months probably. Some of those 22 patients may have cases that are past surgical intervention. The damage may be permanent for some of them." His voice was level, but each word carried weight. "I want you to understand, this is not over when Avery's surgery is done. It will not be over for a very long time." "I know," Tessa said. "Are you prepared to be part of a federal investigation? To give testimony? To have everything you've done examined in detail by people whose job is to find problems?" She looked at him. "I've been examined in detail by Dr. Crane in a conference room with a federal flag already in play. I think I can manage." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, more like the particular expression of a man who is not accustomed to being answered back and has discovered late that he appreciates it. "There's something else," he said. His voice changed register slightly, more careful. "The preemptive report Crane filed. The legal team looked at the metadata. The document was not created the day after you called me. He paused. It was created 11 days ago. Tessa went completely still. 11 days ago, she said slowly. Before my examination. Before any of this. Before your examination, he confirmed. She calculated that. She let it land completely. 11 days ago, she had been in her second week at Northridge, learning the floor plan in which elevator went where, in which nurses took their lunch at 12 versus 1. 11 days ago, she had not yet been assigned to room 12. She had not yet heard Avery Blackwood's name. He was preparing for someone to find it, she said. Not specifically me, someone. He already knew the question was coming. That's what the IG believes, the general said. And if that's true, then this is not a case of negligence. It's not a case of error or oversight. He let the words sit. It is a case of something else entirely. And the IG will determine what that something else is. Tessa stood in the corridor outside Avery's room and felt the ground beneath the story shift again. Deeper this time, wider, the way an earthquake reshapes the thing you thought you were standing on so completely that you have to rebuild your entire sense of what the surface is. She thought about the 17 specialist reports with their strange uniformity. She thought about Arthur's internal flag buried 8 months ago. She thought about the membrane, thin as gossamer, 7 to 10 years old, sitting in a young woman's eye, while every person authorized to find it looked directly at the file instead. She thought about what it takes to maintain something like this, the specific, sustained effort of keeping a truth submerged. And she thought about what that effort requires, not just silence, but participation, not just one man's decision, but a structure that accommodates that decision, a system that closes around it the way water closes around a stone. How deep does this go? She asked. The general looked at her. The IG has subpoenaed insurance billing records going back 12 years, he said. Apparently, the diagnostic codes in these cases generated a specific reimbursement pattern. A pattern that, he stopped, started again more carefully. A pattern that certain parties found advantageous to maintain. Tessa absorbed this with a specific, careful stillness of someone receiving information that changes the size of the thing they are dealing with. Insurance fraud, she said. That is a determination for the IG, he said, not for either of us. But that's what you're saying. He did not confirm it. He did not deny it. He looked at the door to his daughter's room, and what was on his face was the old, complex thing she had seen since the hotel meeting. The love and the fury and the grief, inseparable, wound through each other so completely that untangling them would require taking apart something essential. Go talk to her, he said. She's been asking for you since 3 o'clock. Tessa knocked on Avery's door. Finally, Avery said before she was fully through it. Dad sent you? He's in the corridor. I know. I can hear him breathing. She was sitting in the chair by the window, same position as always. But something about her was different. The quality of her stillness had changed, become charged with something, like a wire carrying current. Sit down. I need to ask you something I can't ask him. Tessa sat. The surgery, Avery said. Dr. Voss gave me the probabilities. Recovery of functional central vision in the right eye. She said 60 to 70%, depending on factors she can't fully assess until they're in. A pause. Which means 30 to 40% I come out of that surgery and I still can't see. That's the honest number, Tessa said. I know. Avery turned her face slightly. My father wants me to wait. He wants more opinions, more assessments, more time to be certain. Because he's afraid that if it doesn't work, it'll be worse than not trying. And what do you want? Avery was quiet for a long moment. I want you to tell me honestly, when you looked through that ophthalmoscope and you saw what you saw, what did you feel? Tessa thought about it. She thought about the 4 seconds of standing completely still, the heartbeat going wrong, the specific quality of that moment when you see something and you know, not think, not hope, but know that it is real. I felt certain, she said, which doesn't happen often. That's what I needed, Avery said. That's enough. She sat back, her hands, which had been tense in her lap, relaxed. I'm telling my father tomorrow morning, she said. I'm scheduling the surgery. At 7:15 that evening, Tessa was finishing her notes at the nursing station when Carol appeared beside her. Carol, who had been watching all of this unfold from the particular vantage point of 22 years of institutional knowledge, who had made phone calls she wasn't supposed to make and looked away from things she could have reported and chosen, quietly and without announcement, which side of this she was on. Carol set a cup of coffee on the desk in front of her. Arthur went home early, Carol said. The IG team was with him for 2 hours. How did he seem? Like a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just been allowed to put it down. A pause. How are you? Tessa looked at the coffee. She picked it up. It was real coffee, not the break room kind. Carol had gone somewhere else to get it. I'm all right, she said. You don't have to be, you know. Carol looked at her with the directness of someone who has earned the right to say what she actually thinks. You have been running on nothing but conviction for 5 days. That's not sustainable. I know. Go home after this shift. Sleep. I will. Carol looked at her for a moment longer. You know what the hardest part of what you did was? It wasn't Crane. It wasn't the board or the IG or any of that. She paused. The hardest part was the first step. When you picked up that phone and called a 4-star general with 3 weeks of tenure and a page of handwritten notes. A beat. Most people don't take that step. They think about it. They decide it's too big. They tell themselves someone else will. Tessa looked at the surface of her coffee. My mother used to say that the only difference between the people who change things and the people who don't, she said, is that the people who change things can't convince themselves it's someone else's problem. She paused. She was usually right. Her phone buzzed. One text, from a number she'd had to look up only once and would not forget. General Blackwood's personal line. It said, surgery scheduled. 3 weeks from Friday. Dr. Voss presiding. Avery wanted you to know first. Tessa set her phone down on the desk. She sat with that for a moment. Just that. 3 weeks from Friday, an 18-year-old girl who had been told her whole life that certain things were impossible was going to find out whether the person who told her that had been wrong or had been something worse than wrong. And Tessa Morgan, who had arrived at this hospital 3 weeks ago with a duffel bag, a printed research paper, and a stubbornness she'd inherited from a woman who never stopped believing in the distance between what is and what could be, was going to be there. Whatever came next, the investigation, the testimony, the questions that were going to be asked about things far larger than one doctor and one patient, whatever came next, that surgery was the fixed point. The thing she had promised, the thing she had not let go. She picked up her pen. She went back to her notes. She had a shift to finish. The 3 weeks between the surgery being scheduled and the surgery actually happening were the longest of Tessa's professional life, and not because they were quiet. They were the opposite of quiet. The Inspector General's investigation moved with a kind of institutional momentum that, once started, does not pause for anyone's comfort or convenience. Federal investigators arrived at Northridge on a Thursday morning with document requests that covered 12 years of billing records, diagnostic coding histories, insurance reimbursement files, and internal communications from Dr. Crane's department. They set up in a conference room on the second floor, and they worked with the particular focused efficiency of people who do this for a living and have learned not to be surprised by what they find, and yet sometimes are anyway. Tessa was interviewed on the second day. The lead investigator was a woman named Special Agent Diane Cho, compact, late 40s, with the kind of attention that made you feel like every word you said was being filed and cross-referenced in real time against something she already knew. She asked good questions. She let the answers breathe before she asked the next one. She did not lead, which Tessa respected. The interview lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. When it was over, Cho looked at her notes for a moment and then looked up at Tessa with an expression that was professionally neutral and just barely something else underneath. "Nurse Morgan," she said, "in your assessment, and I understand this is not your area of expertise, do you believe the diagnostic pattern in these 22 cases was intentional?" Tessa looked at her. She thought about the membrane, 7 to 10 years. She thought about the document created 11 days before she ever entered room 12. She thought about Arthur's internal report, buried in 8 months of institutional silence. "I believe," she said carefully, "that intentional and accidental look very different in the paperwork, and this paperwork looks very different from accidental." Cho wrote something down, closed her notebook. "Thank you for your time," she said. Tessa walked out of that room and found Carol waiting in the corridor with 2 cups of coffee. Because Carol had spent 22 years learning exactly when coffee was necessary and had never once been wrong about the timing. "How was it?" Carol asked. "She's very good," Tessa said. "Better than Crane's lawyers? We'll find out." Crane had retained legal counsel by the end of the first week. 2 attorneys, a malpractice specialist, and a criminal defense lawyer, which told you something about how his own team assessed the situation. He had not come to work since the day after the conference room meeting. His department was being managed on a rotating basis by 3 other physicians who had all, in the space of 72 hours, developed the particular careful distance of people who are reassessing how close they had been standing to something that is now on fire. The hospital moved around his absence like water around a stone it has decided to go past. The 22 patients, or their families, were being contacted individually by a combination of the general's legal team and the hospital's patient advocacy office. Tessa did not have direct involvement in those conversations, which was correct. It was not her role and she knew it. But she heard things, the way you hear things in a hospital, through half-open doors and lowered voices, and the expressions on people's faces when they come back from phone calls they didn't want to have to make. Some of the 22 had conditions that were past surgical intervention. The membrane formation, left untreated for too many years, had in several cases caused secondary damage that closed the window permanently. Tessa heard this on a Tuesday afternoon from Dr. Voss, who had been brought in as a consulting expert for the review, and who told her with the flat precision of someone delivering information that has to be delivered factually or not at all. "How many?" Tessa asked. 7, possibly 8. We're still assessing the full extent in 2 of those cases. 7 people. 7 people who had lived their entire lives inside a diagnosis that may have been manufactured or maintained for financial advantage, and who would now continue to live inside it, not because it was true, but because it had been true long enough to become permanent in the body regardless of what it had been in the paperwork. Tessa sat with that number for a long time. She sat with it the way you sit with things that are your fault and not your fault simultaneously, because she had not created this situation, had not perpetuated it, had in fact done everything within her power to break it open the moment she found it. And yet, 7 people. And the question of what might have happened if someone had asked the right question 5 years ago instead of 3 weeks ago was a question she was going to be living alongside for the rest of her career. She told this to Dr. Voss, not as a confession because it wasn't that, as a fact she needed to say out loud to someone who would understand the specific weight of it. Voss looked at her. "You know that this is not yours to carry." "I know. But you're going to carry it anyway." "Some of it," Tessa said. "Some of it I think I should." Voss was quiet for a moment. "The ones who can be helped," she said, "we're going to help. That's the job. The rest," she paused, "the rest is the investigation's job, and the court's job, and ultimately the system's job, if the system does what it's supposed to do." She looked at her directly. "Your job was to see what nobody else saw. You did that. Don't let guilt from the consequences of other people's decisions becomes something that stops you from doing it again the next time. Tessa heard her. She filed it. She was not sure she had fully absorbed it yet, but she filed it for later. The surgery was scheduled for a Friday. The Thursday before it, Tessa's phone rang at 9:15 in the evening. It was Avery. "I can't sleep," Avery said. "That's normal before surgery." "I know it's normal. I'm not calling because I'm worried about the surgery." A pause. "I'm calling because I've been thinking about something all day, and I need to say it to someone before I lose my nerve and don't say it." "Go ahead." "When I wake up," Avery said, "if it works, if I can actually see." She stopped, started again. "I've been blind my whole life. My entire identity is built inside that fact. The way I move, the way I understand space, the way I read people, everything I know about how to be in the world, I built it without sight." Another pause. "I'm not afraid of the surgery not working. I'm afraid of it working, because I don't know who I am if the thing that defined me for 18 years turns out to have been a choice someone made for me." Tessa was quiet for a moment. She thought about that very carefully, because it deserved careful thought and not a quick reassurance that would be kind and useless. "I think," she said slowly, "that the things you built are yours. The way you hear people, the way you move through a room, the way you held that conversation with me the first day I walked in, when you figured out I wasn't Carol before I said a word." She paused. "None of that goes away if you gain something. It just becomes part of a bigger version of the same person." Avery was quiet. "That's a good answer," she said finally. "I've been practicing," Tessa said. Something that might have been a laugh, brief and a little raw, came through the phone. "I'm going to see your face tomorrow," Avery said. "Probably, 60 to 70% probably. I'll try to look presentable. Don't bother on my account. I've been imagining faces for 18 years. Whatever you actually look like, I've already decided." "What did you decide?" "Someone who walks light on their left," Avery said, "and carries something heavy in their right hand that they've had for a long time." A pause. "That's what I decided." Tessa held the phone and did not say anything for a moment because there was nothing that wouldn't diminish it. "Get some sleep," she said finally. "You too," Avery said. The surgery began at 7:15 on a Friday morning in the surgical suite at Johns Hopkins, where Dr. Voss had operating privileges and had insisted the procedure take place. Outside Northridge's jurisdiction entirely, with her own team, in a space that had no history with this case, and therefore no reason to be anything other than exactly what it was supposed to be. Tessa was not in the surgical suite. She was not a surgeon, and she was not Avery's family, and she had no clinical role in the procedure. She knew this. She accepted it. She sat in the waiting area outside the suite with General Marcus Blackwood, who had arrived at 6 o'clock and had been sitting in the same chair ever since, with his hands on his knees and his face doing the thing it always did, carrying everything without showing the carrying. They did not talk much. They had moved past the kind of interaction that requires words to fill silence. Tessa had brought coffee. He had brought nothing except himself, which in his case was sufficient. At one point, around 8:40, he said, "Her mother used to say that Avery saw more than anyone she'd ever met. Without eyes." He paused. "She died when Avery was 9. Cancer." Another pause. "I used to think it was a kindness that she didn't live to know what Crane had done, that she died believing Avery's blindness was simply something that was." He looked at his hands. "Now I'm not sure what to think about that." Tessa looked at him. "I think she was right," she said. "Avery does see more than most people. That part's not going to change regardless of what happens in that room." He looked at her for a moment with that expression she had first seen in the hotel room, the one that had moved past evaluation into something more direct, more personal. "You remind me of her," he said. "My wife. Not in the way you look. In the way you say the thing that needs saying without making the other person feel managed." Tessa absorbed that. "Thank you," she said. It was all that was needed. The surgery lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. Dr. Voss came through the door at 11:26. She was still in her surgical cap. Her face was the professional mask that surgeons wear in the corridor between the operating room and the family. The mask that reveals nothing because the hall is not the right place, and the mask protects everyone until the right moment arrives. The general stood. Tessa stood. Dr. Voss pulled off her cap. She looked at them both. The membrane was fully removed, she said. The underlying structure, the optic pathway, the retinal integrity, is in significantly better condition than the imaging alone suggested. She is in recovery. She is stable. A pause that lasted approximately 1 second, but felt like several. When the post-operative inflammation clears, which will take several days, the probability of functional central vision in the right eye is, in my assessment, very high. The general said nothing. He put one hand on the back of the chair beside him, not sitting, steadying. His jaw was completely tight and his eyes were doing something that he was managing with every resource available to him. Tessa put her hand over her mouth for a moment. Not to hide a sound, there was no sound, but as a physical response to the pressure of something too large to hold in an ordinary posture. "How long before she knows?" she asked when she could. 3 to 5 days for the initial inflammation to clear. We'll do the first functional assessment then. Voss looked at them both with the expression of a surgeon who has done this for 30 years and still has not become immune to this specific moment. "She's asking for both of you. Recovery room, 5 minutes. Avery was awake. Her eyes were covered, padded dressings over both eyes, held with light bandaging, standard post-surgical protocol. She was propped slightly in the bed with her hands in her lap in the Avery way, the particular composure of someone who has been managing the experience of being examined and managed and surrounded by medical equipment since before she could form memories. She turned her head toward the sound of their footsteps with the precision she always had, the auditory map always running. "Dad," she said. The general crossed the room. He sat in the chair beside the bed. He took her hand. He did not say anything for a moment, and she did not require him to. Then she turned her head slightly toward the door. "Tessa." "I'm here," Tessa said. "Did it work?" "Dr. Voss says the probability is very high." A silence, then, "Very high." "Very high." Avery was quiet for a long moment. Her hand tightened in her father's. "Very high," she said again, softer, like she was testing the weight of it, like she was trying to find out how much it would hold if she leaned on it. Then something happened to her face. It started at the jaw, the Blackwood jaw, which released some of its hold. It moved up through her expression in stages, like watching something that has been frozen for a very long time begin, slowly, to thaw. She did not cry. She did something more controlled and more complete than crying. She simply let it through. All of it. 18 years of it. She let it move through her face, and she did not look away from it, and she did not try to manage it, and it was the most honest thing Tessa had seen in a long time. "Okay," Avery said. Her voice was rough at the edges. "Okay." The general bent his head. He pressed his daughter's hand against his forehead and stayed like that. Tessa stepped back to the doorway. Some moments are not meant to be witnessed directly. She already knew this. She looked at the corridor instead, and breathed, and let them have it. The first functional assessment was on a Wednesday morning, 5 days after surgery. The inflammation had cleared faster than projected. Dr. Voss used the word remarkable in a clinical context, which in Tessa's experience was a word Voss used approximately twice a year. Tessa was not in the assessment room for the first moment. That was the general's place and Avery's place, and Tessa understood the geometry of it perfectly. She waited outside. She heard it, though. She heard the moment, not the words, not what Dr. Voss said or what the assessment revealed, but the sound that came from inside that room 6 minutes after the door closed. It was a single sound, short, involuntary, The kind of sound a person makes when something beyond the range of prepared responses actually happens to them. It was the general's voice. That was all. That one sound, and then a silence that was entirely different from every other silence in this story. Full, complete, the silence of something that has arrived and does not need to justify itself. Tessa stood in the corridor with her back against the wall. She did not cry, either. She did the same thing she had done in the recovery room. She let it through, quietly, privately, standing up, because that was the only way she knew how to receive things that were too large for ordinary posture. 3 minutes later, the door opened. Dr. Voss came out first. She looked at Tessa. She nodded once. Then she walked down the corridor with the discretion of a surgeon who understands that the technical work and the human work are not the same thing, and that the human work now belongs to someone else. Avery came out with her father's hand in hers. She was looking at the corridor, not the way she had always turned her head toward sound, looking, eyes tracking, adjusting, taking in. The dressings were removed. Her amber eyes, which Tessa had first seen still and quiet in the examination chair, were moving, working, alive in a way they had not been before. She found Tessa immediately. Tessa stood where she was. Avery walked toward her. She stopped a foot away and she looked at Tessa's face with an expression that was entirely beyond any single emotion. It contained too many things, layered and simultaneous, none of them adequately named by any word currently available. She reached up and she put her hand on Tessa's face, the way she had described doing with her father when she was small, the way she had always known faces, through touch, through texture, through the geometry of bone and expression under her fingertips. But this time her eyes were open. This time she was looking and touching at the same time. "You're younger than I thought," she said. Her voice was not quite steady. "And you look like someone who hasn't slept properly in 3 weeks." "That's accurate," Tessa said. "You have your mother's eyes," Avery said. "I can tell. The kind that have seen grief and decided not to close." Tessa could not speak for a moment. She did not need to. The federal investigation into Dr. Richard Crane was formally announced 6 weeks later. The charges included insurance fraud, criminal negligence, and the count that sent the specific chill through the medical community that such things are designed to send: deliberate falsification of medical records across an 11-year period. The billing scheme, once fully reconstructed by the IG's forensic accountants, revealed that specific diagnostic codes assigned to these 22 patients had generated a particular reimbursement structure, a long-term care premium that was triggered by permanent disability classifications, and that paid, over time, significantly more than the codes for treatable conditions would have warranted. The scheme was not exclusively Crane's. That was the thing that came out in pieces over the weeks following the announcement. The thing that enlarged the story each time a new piece arrived. 2 insurance administrators, a coding consultant who had worked with the department for 7 years, a former hospital administrator who had left Northridge 14 months earlier for a private practice role. Arthur from Medical Records testified before the IG panel for 6 hours. He came out of it looking exhausted and, for the first time since Tessa had known him, something like relieved. She ran into him in the 4th-floor corridor 2 days after his testimony, and he looked at her with the expression of a man who has finally put down something he had been carrying up a hill for 8 months and discovered that the hill was shorter than it felt from the bottom. "How are you?" she asked him. "Tired," he said, "and glad." He paused. In that order. The hospital board convened a special session. New protocols were announced. Mandatory diagnostic reviews for all long-term cases at maximum 24-month intervals. Independent second opinion requirements for permanent disability classifications. A new whistleblower protection policy that Tessa read 3 times to make sure it was actually what it claimed to be. It was, largely, not perfect, but real. Carol read it too. She told Tessa what she thought of it in the break room one afternoon in 2 flat sentences. It's better than nothing, and it's worse than it should be. That's most things in this world. She poured herself coffee. You should be on the committee. I'm a nurse with 4 months of tenure, Tessa said. You're the reason the committee exists, Carol said. There's a difference. She gave Tessa the look she had, the 22-year look that contained everything it had seen and had chosen what to do about it. They're going to ask you to join the reform panel. When they do, don't be humble about it. Humility is for people who haven't earned the right to take up space yet. 2 weeks later, the hospital board did ask. Tessa joined the reform panel. She also received a letter from the Nursing Association, formal, on letterhead, the kind of letter that is both recognition and responsibility dressed in the same envelope. They were establishing a case review program for nurses who identified diagnostic discrepancies outside the scope of their official role. They wanted her to help design the intake process, to put into structure the things she had done instinctively in a break room at 6:15 in the morning with a cold cup of coffee and a file that didn't read right. She said yes to that too. General Blackwood held a press statement in the hospital lobby on a Thursday morning, 11 weeks after the story broke in the military press, and 4 weeks after the federal charges were announced. He was precise, measured, and absolutely controlled in the way that was simply what he was. There was no performance in it, only the quality of a man who believes that the way you say something is as important as what you say, because both are a form of accountability. He said that his family's experience had made clear that the structures designed to protect patients are only as strong as the people willing to challenge them when they fail. He said that a nurse in her 4th week at this hospital had done what 17 specialists over 18 years had not because she was more qualified, but because she had refused to let the file tell her what she was allowed to see. He said her name. Tessa was standing at the back of the lobby. She had not planned to come. She had been walking past on her way to a shift and had stopped when she heard it beginning. The way you stop when something is happening that you are part of. She stood at the back with her badge clipped to her scrubs and her hair pulled back and her arms crossed in the way she had when she was thinking. And she listened to her name in the mouth of a 4-star general in a hospital lobby, in front of cameras and reporters and people who had come specifically for this. She did not move toward the front. She did not raise her hand. She did not need to be seen in this moment, because this moment was not about being seen. It was about something being said correctly, publicly, so that it became part of the record, so that what had happened was not absorbed back into institutional silence the way so many things like it had been, so that the next Arthur, the next Tessa, the next person standing in a stairwell holding something true and terrifying would know that there was a version of this story where speaking was worth it. After the statement, Avery found her. She was navigating the lobby with her cane still, old habits, and also practical wisdom, because the right eye was functional and the left was still unchanged. And she was adapting the way she adapted to everything, with the systematic, unsentimental intelligence she had been building for 18 years. She looked at Tessa directly, the amber eyes now alive and tracking and fully present. "You're still hiding at the back," she said. "I'm not hiding, I'm watching." "Same thing sometimes." A pause. "My father wanted to thank you again." "He's already thanked me." "He's going to keep thanking you. That's who he is. You'll have to get used to it." "I'll manage," Tessa said. Avery looked at her. "What happens now? For you?" Tessa thought about it. She thought about the reform panel, the Nursing Association program, the shift she was about to start in 40 minutes, the 16 other patients on Ward 7 who had nothing to do with any of this and who needed someone who would look at their files with the same attention she had given to one. "I go back to work," she said. Avery smiled. It was a real smile, the first full one Tessa had seen from her, the kind that uses everything, that you can only give when you have stopped rationing yourself. "Of course you do," she said. "That's the answer I expected." Tessa looked at her, at the face she had first known through still amber eyes, in an examination chair. The face she had promised things to and meant every word of. The face that had taught her, more than anything in her career, that the distance between what is and what could be is not always as fixed as someone with a credential and a folder full of paperwork wants you to believe. "Take care of yourself," Tessa said. "I can see now," Avery said. "I plan to." She tilted her head slightly. "Go, you have patience." Tessa went. She walked down the corridor, past the nursing station where Carol was already moving with the efficient authority of a woman who has decided how she is going to spend her 23rd year at this hospital, past the elevator where Arthur was stepping off with a cup of coffee and a manila folder, and the look of someone who has accepted that the right thing and the easy thing are rarely the same thing, and has decided to keep doing the right one anyway. She clipped her badge. She picked up the first chart. She was a 26-year-old nurse with 4 months of tenure at Northridge Military Medical Center, and a desk covered in notes, and a panel to sit on, and a program to build, and a ward full of people who needed someone to look at them. Really look, past the file, in the history, in the things that had been decided before she walked through the door, and to ask the question that changes everything. The question that no credential gives you, and no seniority confirms, and no hospital protocol teaches. She asked it every day. She would keep asking it until the asking itself became the standard. Not the exception, not the act of a single stubborn nurse who refused to be invisible, but the baseline, the floor, the thing that every person who put on those scrubs understood was the whole point. That was what she had promised, not in words, not to any single person, but in the way she had picked up a phone with a page of handwritten notes and called a 4-star general, and in the way she had sat across from a man who tore paper in half and told her she was nothing and had not moved. That was the promise. She kept it every day, and that was enough.